Hello, my name is Julie, and today I'm going to be reacting to and then reading some of the Goodreads Choice Awards nominees for fantasy. So if you missed it, a couple of videos back, I shared with you all my predictions for the Goodreads Choice Awards for Fantasy. I made a spreadsheet that I curated over the course of months about the different books that Goodreads had been putting on different lists. I kept a spreadsheet of over 100 books that had come out in 2024 that feasibly could be nominated in any of the fantasy adjacent categories. I did a bunch of research on each of those specific books, updated over the course of months, and I also did research into the previous years of the awards to try to see if there were any unwritten rules about what books could get nominated. And I came up with my list of 20. So if you would like to see what books I predicted, go watch that and come back here. And if you have watched that and would like a reminder of what my 20 books are, these were my 20 books that I picked. So on the day of the awards, I am going to react to the nominations, and then I am going to pick at least 3 books that I haven't read from the nomination and read those and see if that changes what my vote is going to be. So without further ado, let's go to the announcement of the nominations. Hello. It is the morning of the Goodreads Choice Awards nominations announcement. I woke up early before work to be able to see this and not be spoiled for it before looking it up. My body feels physically terrible, so I wish I hadn't. Okay, to remind you of the stakes, I have said I would like 12 out of 20 of my predictions to be correct, subtracting any books that end up being added to other genres. But I would like all 20 books to have been on my spreadsheet, which I think is likely. I'm really genuinely super nervous for some reason. I think it's also because I woke my body up at a different time and it has triggered a fight or flight response. But that's fine. Let's just go ahead. Okay, it's gonna show like a couple of books first. Okay. Oh no. Okay, immediately looking. They did include Empire of the Damned, even though they shunted Empire of the Vampire. And then Jay Kristoff went on like a tirade on Twitter. Of those 3, I have 2 correct and 1 wrong. Let's look. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. The Night Ends with Fire by KX Song. I was correct. That was my 19th pick. That is a mythology book. I think that was being advertised a lot on Goodreads, so I thought that was a pretty good pick when it came down to books that hadn't had enough readers yet. Somewhere Beyond the Sea is one of the easy picks of the year because it is the top 3 most read books of the year, top 2 most shelved books of the year. A Song to Drown Rivers was also a fairly easy pick once you got out of that like 20,000 reviews mark. It was a book of the month pick, a Good Morning America pick. The Tainted Cup I have read. I gave it a 3. I definitely think in terms of the fantasy content in the book, 100% deserves the nomination. I just didn't love the mystery. Warm Hands of Ghosts I've got right here. I read this as an ARC because I loved The Bear and the Nightingale and I really enjoyed it. I gave it like a 4.25, 4.5. This is World War I historical fantasy about siblings trying to find each other again. Then we've got Win Among Crows by Veronica Roth. It has a 3.72, so it was still within my range, and I did keep it on my list because I think Veronica Roth is like a famous enough author, and it had a bunch of readers and everything, and that was good. So I've correctly guessed 6. An Academy for Liars is my first trip up because I think this book has a 3.6. It has a 3.60. It doesn't have that many ratings because it just came out, but it definitely was one of the more hyped books of the year. It's just not getting great reviews. I am a little bit surprised they put it on there, but I fully eliminated any book below a 3.7, and maybe I shouldn't have. It's just they did not have books below a 3.7 for the last 2 years. Next up, we have The Book of Doors by Gareth Brown. This was another easy gimme book for this year. So that was 7 out of 8, but we know I've made at least 1 more mistake. Let's see the next ones. Wow! Wow! Oh my goodness! Okay, first up, we have The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. We know that's gonna win. The Dead Cattail Assassins by P. Djeli Clark. I also read an arc of this. I really enjoyed P. Djeli Clark's previous books, and I read this. I think I did give this like a 3.5. I thought that this world was so cool, but I wish that this was a full-length novel. I do have that on my spreadsheet, but that means I'm wrong on 3 books. Okay. I did not have this on my list because I didn't think that this had enough readership. They are curating this list a little bit. I'm just surprised. Like, this book did not show up on a lot of lists. Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands was another easy pick. That is like the second most read book of the year, might become third. It's like the third most shelved book of the year. Sequel to a very successful book last year. A Sweet Sting of Salt by Rose Sutherland. I actually have in the other room. I'm not gonna go get it right now because it'll mess up my setup. But I own this book. I want to read this book. I think I'm really gonna like it. It's like a sapphic reimagining of the Selkie wife, and I really want to read that. I'm surprised that's on there. Like, I just didn't think that that had enough shelving. I think it had an okay readership, but not not even. It doesn't even have 4,000 people having read it. And it has a 3.86, so I really wouldn't have picked it. Next up. Okay. We've got 3. We've got 3 good ones. Empire of the Damned I did not have on my list because of their sequel rule. They simply didn't have sequels that weren't, the previous book wasn't nominated. But honestly, I think there was kind of like slim pickings this year when it came to sequels that had been, like, the previous book had been nominated before, so they did break their rule. Voyage of the Damned by Frances White I did have on my list. Like, fantasy Agatha Christie vibe. I'm excited. I'd like to read that one. The Foxwife by Yangsha Chu. I'm glad I added late in my list. Honestly, I had no idea that it was in fantasy. I thought it was more in fiction for a while. But yeah, it is a fantasy from a traditionally historical fiction author. Then we've got The Black Bird Oracle by Deborah Harkness. This is the 4th book in the All Souls trilogy. So like the trilogy finished up like 10 years ago and now she's writing another book. So I thought that was an easy shot, and it was. So where are we at this point? I've missed 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's the last ones. And I got all of those right. I got all of the last ones right. So we have The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman. Lev Grossman is an author that people really like because he wrote The Magicians, and this is a retelling of like Camelot stuff. I didn't really hear about this until I was researching for the awards, but it does look pretty good. Then we have A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher, which I currently have out from the library, anticipating reading it for this. This is a reimagining of the folktale The Goose Girl. Other than that, I don't know anything about it. I just know that T. Kingfisher writes weird fantasy. Then we have 5 Broken Blades by Mike Cortland. This was also fairly easy past that first round. And it's like 5 assassins teaming up in an Asian-inspired fantasy. And then The Lost Story by Meg Schaefer was my last-minute addition to the list because I was under the impression it was considered a fiction book. I literally was just wrong. I looked at the Goodreads page and was just incorrect. So I'm so glad that I checked it right before I posted that video because I ended up being right. So I got 4 books wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4. I got 16 correct out of 20. My stretch goal was to get 15 out of 20 correct, so I did pass my stretch goal. While I did adhere to kind of some strict rules in picking my books, I think it was a safe bet to go for the higher scoring books. Because if I had tried to pick oddballs, I would have probably picked a different oddball book. One book broke the rule of having less than a 3.7. One book broke the sequel rule. A Sweet Sting of Stall actually was on a lot of like debut-y lists, but I didn't really see it other places. That was on my list of contenders I could have picked. And Dead Cattail Assassins, I would have, like, at the beginning of the year, if you would have asked me to pick, I would have put it on the list because it was really anticipated. But yeah, I did really well. Maybe I'll talk to you more later after work. Hi, it's after work, and I've had a little bit more time to actually look at the rest of the Goodreads Choice Awards and do a little bit of analysis on what was picked. But first, I want to talk about what I didn't get to talk about earlier today, about the 4 books that I incorrectly put on my list. So I did say that I would like to subtract any books that I had actually put in the wrong category. It turns out that of the 4 books that I picked, 2 of them were actually put into the fantasy romance category. One of them I saw coming, one of them I kind of didn't. I didn't even think it was that good of a shot that it was gonna get nominated. There were 27 books on my giant spreadsheet that ended up being nominated for other things. There was one book that was put into romance. There were a bunch of books that were put in the YA fantasy category, and there were a good amount of books that were put into the fantasy romance category. And there were 3 books that I incorrectly placed, and that's because I was trying to be conservative. If I wasn't entirely sure that a book would be going into fantasy romance over fantasy, I kept it in the fantasy category. And those 3 books were The Spell Shop and A Dark and Drowning Tide, both of which were put in my nominations. And the last one was The Honey Witch, which I did not put in my nominations, mostly because its rating was really low, but obviously it still got nominated. I wasn't expecting it because I feel like all 3 of these books are kind of outside of what most books that are put in fantasy romance have been, mostly because I feel like Honey Witch and Spell Shop are being marketed as like cozy fantasy romance. We hadn't really seen that last year, but now we have a couple more data points. Dark and Drowning Tide, I haven't read. The Spell Shop, however, I have read. Having read The Spell Shop, I thought it was more in line with books like Emily Wilde and Legends and Lattes and Tress of the Emerald Sea, of like the amount of romance content that they have. But I think that this kind of just goes to show that genre is marketing and not necessarily the content. You know, there's some magical realism that is shelved as fantasy versus being shelved as fiction, and it's totally people trying to pick a market. And I think we see that with The Spell Shop. It was published by Bramble, which is Tor's new fantasy romance imprint. It has been advertised as a romantasy on like the back of the book. I think it's more of a fantasy, but it like really doesn't matter. And if you remember from last video, this was going to be my pick. This was going to be the book that I was going to vote for. I gave it a 5-star. I guess now I get to vote for it in the fantasy romance category. This means this video is even more important because now I have to have a task of finding a book better than The Warm Hands of Ghosts. And if I don't, I am going to be voting for that Warm Hands of Ghosts. Those 2 books, I am like, cool, I got it right that they were nominated. The other 2 that I got wrong, one, we've got The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. I literally put this on my list because it was the only sequel I had not put on the list that the previous book had been put in the Goodreads Choice Awards before. I am not surprised that this wasn't nominated because it did not make the top 10 last year. I kind of just put it in there as a random guess and needing a sequel. So that means that, yeah, Empire of the Damned, we talked about it before, it did break the sequel rule that they have, but I think kind of what we can see is that that was a trend in the past at the very least. But over the last 4 years, they decreased the amount of sequels that they're doing. So now we're really like funneling how many series are going to be able to. Empire of the Damned is the highest rated book of the year, and it is one of the most read books of the year. If something was going to break that sequel rule, I am in no way surprised that it was Empire of the Damned. And then the last one that I got wrong was Blood Over Brighthaven, which I said I was going to be mad about, and I am mad about it. I am mad about it. It is the highest rated standalone, and I would assume that the reason that it didn't get the nomination is because Goodreads did not consider it a significant enough re-release. But it also might have been, it wasn't a super highly shelved book. There are some books on this list that did not even make my like top shelved books when I really tried to dig down and find more books. Blood Over Brighthaven was on the list of most shelved, but I would like to say of the 4, I would not have chosen any of the 4 actually nominated books that I got wrong. So I would have just been more wrong. I would have been different wrong. Empire of the Damned and Academy for Liars, I eliminated. The other 2, I thought had too low of a readership, but I do think that those were kind of the editor picks that they kind of curated the list around, and I am so happy to see both of them on there. And A Sweet Sting of Salt, it was good to see a debut author on here, so I think, if I'm right, I think there were 4 debut authors that were in the nominees this year. A Sweet Sting of Salt, Voyage of the Damned, 5 Broken Blades, and The Book of Doors. I have a bunch of stats that I want to do about the books that were actually nominated, and I want to compare them to the last couple of years. A lot of you were really complimentary about the amount of research that I did in my previous video about this, so I will definitely be delivering with more graphs, just not at this moment because I want to look at the data a little bit more before I talk about it. But I need to pick what books I'm going to read. So I already have A Sorceress Comes to Call from the library, so I was already planning on reading this and I am going to start it tonight. I did finally read a summary of The Goose Girl, so I have a little bit of a basis of what should be going on in here. I think this could really be a winner for me, and it does have a really high rating. And then of course, I do own A Sweet Sting of Salt. This is the aardvark copy, and man, like I don't cover by a lot. And I knew that this was a fantasy and it's a retelling, and it kind of had a lot of check boxes for me, but like this cover got me. I'm not usually a photography person, but something about this is so like in my wheelhouse. Like this feels like a movie poster for something I'd want to watch. This is inspired by The Selkie Wife, which I should read before reading this, so I'm definitely going to read these two. I need to decide how many books I'm actually going to read in this vlog. Maybe I won't decide right now, but I do have off the top of my head the ones that would pique my interest the most are Voyage of the Damned and A Song to Drown Rivers. I almost even bought A Song to Drown Rivers from Book of the Month, anticipating it being a pick for this. So I will definitely be reading these two, and I will get back to you once I have started reading A Sorceress Comes to Call. I have gotten 100 pages into A Sorceress Comes to Call, and I am quite liking this. This is definitely gearing up to be a 4-star book so far. So our main character is Cordelia. Her mother controls every aspect of her life, not only in the mundane way that a parent might be able to have control over their child, but also she has the ability to completely physically control Cordelia whenever she wants. She doesn't do it all the time, but in the first scene, we actually see Cordelia not be able to move in church. And you think it's because she's been told that she can't move, but it's actually because her mother is physically controlling her entire body. Her mother does not let her have any privacy, any secrets. Our main character thinks that she is able to talk to her horse and give all the secrets, but it turns out that her mother is a sorceress and the horse is her familiar. Our main character can't really see outside of the life that she lives, but she wants nothing more than to be able to get away from her mother. She just doesn't see an escape route. And her mother decides to try to marry a man. So the two of them are staying at this guy's manor as her mom tries to seduce this guy. Cordelia is finally being treated like a human being with independence by the people who are at the house. The man's sister knows that something's up with the mom and Cordelia and is trying to stop it. I have really been enjoying this so far. I like the vibe of this. I'm definitely rooting for Cordelia. Like, she's a very sympathetic character, and I think the way that like parental manipulation is written in this is, even though it's in a fantasy world, very realistic. I'll get back to you in a bit. I should be going to bed, but I am 200 pages into A Sorceress Comes to Call, so I thought I'd give you an update. Don't mind the tinfoil on my wall. I am trying to figure out where I want to put shelving. I think that this like has kept up with its premise. Like, I feel like so many fantasy books that I've specifically read from 2024, like, I really liked the premise in the beginning. I was like, oh, this is gonna be so good. And then something went wrong and I just didn't care. But I really like this book. I didn't expect to, but I'm quite liking the two perspectives that we're following. So Cordelia is the main character, and her mom is Evangeline. She's trying to marry Samuel. Samuel's sister is Hester. Hester and Cordelia are two point of view characters, and I am actually really enjoying getting to see from both of them. And Cordelia's, you know, been abused, and Hester's like recognizing that and wanting to help her, and the two of them are going to try to work together to stop the mother. Having just like Wikipedia's version of The Goose Girl, I think that this is an interesting, let's call it an interpolation. There are elements that you can pick out that it's like, oh, T. Kingfisher took this part and changed it and did this. It's not really a retelling because our characters aren't like one to one. It's like she took elements from the story and put them in different places. And I think that is so interesting. And I'm just, you know, engaged. I had a lot of books that I read last month that were 3 stars, 3 stars, 3 stars, 3 stars. I think it's also interesting because this is a fantasy that is set in a really isolated setting. So it kind of does have that like gothic-y feel to it of we're in a manor house. I'm picturing the setting of Jane Eyre. I have previously read 3 T. Kingfisher books, and all of them are actually shelved as horror. So this is fun to read a book that leans more fantasy. Although this is like a book that could be enjoyed by non-fantasy readers because this is not heavy on the fantasy at all. The magic is very light. I need to pick out what my 3rd and/or 4th book's gonna be. I thought I'd update you to say I made a decision on what books I'm reading. So there are 10 books left in the Goodreads Choice Awards that I could read. And I tried audiobooks of Song to Drown Rivers, Voyage of the Damned, The Lost Story, The Bright Sword, and Somewhere Beyond the Sea. So I sampled all 5 of those audiobooks. And the only one that bothered me any was Voyage of the Damned. I felt like I couldn't hear everything. That was kind of like, okay, if I do Voyage of the Damned, I'll just read it physically. And there are 3 books that are currently available at a library that is 30 minutes away from me. When assessing my stuff, I really did figure out, I think A Song to Drown Rivers is the most likely book for me to give a 5-star to. I will put more books on hold. Voyage of the Damned, The Fox Wife, A Song to Drown Rivers were all available at a different library. I also currently have the ebook for The Night Ends with Fire. I'm going to read A Song to Drown Rivers, and I will continue reading probably 1 more, depending on if library holds come in. I have finished A Sorceress Comes to Call, and I really enjoyed this. I've been a little bit slumpy lately and just not wanting to pick up a book, but this really did capture my attention. It's a really good example of dark fantasy, like having a little bit of a fairy tale, having a little bit of a horror element. I'm really happy with the amount of horror that is in this. It really like tied together into a really cohesive tone and feel. There was just a lot to like here. Is this my favorite T. Kingfisher now? I don't know. What Moves the Dead is really strong as well. And honestly, like these two aren't too dissimilar from each other. And it's actually really funny how there are kind of similarities between this and her other 2024 release. They both have deteriorating horses in it. Yeah, I'm definitely giving this more than just a flat 4-star. Like this is like a 4.25 or a 4.5. There wasn't anything that like I thought this book did wrong. There wasn't anything I didn't like. It's not a full 5, but I really liked it. So that means it is in competition with The Warm Hands of Ghosts. There were some things about Warm Hands of Ghosts that were like 5-star quality, and there were some things that I wasn't as much a fan of. This, like everything, I felt pretty consistently happy with. I totally get why this has such a high rating on Goodreads. So if you are a T. Kingfisher fan, I don't think you'll be disappointed. That means tomorrow I will start my other 2 definite reads for this. Hello. I have read a good amount, a third to 40% of A Song to Drown Rivers on my drive. So A Song to Drown Rivers is about our main character, Sisha, who is one of the 4 beauties of China, and she ends up standing up for a young child who is about to be killed by a man from an invading force. And her act of bravery, while it nearly got her killed, was actually witnessed by the military strategist of the king of the kingdom that she actually supports. He ends up recruiting her to become the bride of the rival king whose forces ended up killing her little sister. She is going to become his bride and be a spy for her own nation and eventually plot his downfall. She is training for a while under the military strategist guy who's trying to teach them how to be ladies at court and then how to be a spy underneath that. So we have gotten to the point in the book where the training is done. She is about to get sent off, but she is quite interested in the military strategist. I remembered why I was so hesitant about this book a while ago, and it's because some of the reviews are that this book is heavy on the romance. So far from what I've observed, it felt like it was appropriate for what was going on. There's nothing that like felt like we were taking time away from the important stuff. I like our main character. I've been liking the writing style so far, and I'm ready for the politics to start up. At the beginning of this, I was like, huh, this is really reminding me of Daughter of the Moon Goddess. And then I looked it up. They have the exact same audio narrator. So that's definitely what I was thinking of when it came to the narration. But then there started to be a good amount of similarities. Like, obviously, both of these books are fantasies that are inspired by Chinese mythology, Chang'e and the Four Beauties. But the thing is, there's been like particular scenes that I've been like, huh, in Daughter of the Moon Goddess, our main character is like washing clothes by a stream or something when she meets this man and they hit it off or whatever. And it turns out that he's the prince and he takes her to like study with him and be his companion. And in this one, she's washing silks, sees a child get hurt, goes into the altercation, and then is saved by a man who turns out to be advisor to the king. And then he's going to take her and like do that. There was also like a scene where they go to a market and like get matching things, like basically like friendship tokens. That felt a little bit like Daughter of the Moon Goddess. Anyway, well, maybe she'll fucking end up with the right guy this time. Me thinking, oh, these books are like comp titles or one thing, but like, what if things keep happening that are still remarkably similar? I will hope that they do not, but yes. So far, having a good time. But I thought that now would be the time that I give you my stat breakdown of what's going on the Goodreads Choice Award nominees. First up, let's talk about the number of reviews. So 8 of the books had over 20,000 ratings. That is a very, very small portion of the books that were on my list, of course, but yeah, they're the most popular ones. They're gonna be on there. Then we had 5 books that were in the 10 to 20K, 5 books that were in the 5 to 10K, and then we had 2 books that were 2.5 to 5K. And those were the 2 books that I personally was excited about, but didn't put on my list because they didn't have enough readership. And these are the 2 that I would consider to probably be the curated picks. Like, just about everything else really had a backing for why it was put on there when it came to numbers. Then we have the average ratings. At the bottom, we have the lowest ratings. Once you get to that aqua blue color, that is where 4.0 begins. In that red at the very bottom is where my rule of anything under a 3.7 going away was broken. So let me compare this version to the last 3 years. On the left, we're gonna have the 2024 nominees, and on the right, we're gonna have the 2021. We are at the minimum number of books under a 3.8. We had more 3.7s going in the last couple years. However, this year actually had fewer books than ever be above a 4.0. Maybe this was a bad year for fantasy if you think about it that way, or maybe the ones that were higher quality weren't necessarily making the numbers. I really have thought about if I hadn't eliminated those books that were below the 3.7 mark. There were books that I would have put in that were in between a 3.5 and a 3.6. If I had moved my marker to be 3.6 and below are eliminated, I think I would have scored similarly. A lot of the books that were more shelved than Academy for Liars, they were in that 3.5 range. So Lady Macbeth, A Short Walk Through a Wide World, and An Education in Malice are 3 that come to mind that were all more popular than An Academy for Liars when it came to shelvings. If any book was going to be on there that broke my rule, it was going to be that one because it was far enough away from that 3.5 cutoff while having the high shelvings. Shrug. Number of lists that this was on. 7 of the 20 books are on 5 or more of the lists that I pulled up to make my spreadsheet. And guess what? There were exactly 7 books that were on 5 or more lists. So every single one of the most mentioned books of the year made the list. So there are 2 books that made the nominations that had 4 lists, and there were only 3 books that had 4 lists. One of them was A Short Walk Through a Wide World, which had a 3.54 and wasn't gonna get nominated. And then 11 of the books from there on out in 3 or fewer lists. The books that were only on 1 list are the 2 books that I believed were magical realism, more fiction side of things, The Fox Wife and The Lost Story. We can look at the author's nomination status. So as we know, 2 of the people who are nominated are previous winners, Leigh Bardugo and Deborah Harkness. Then we have 8 people who are previous nominees of the Adult Fantasy Awards. We have 5 people who are previous nominees of other categories. So yeah, we really do have a bias where 75% of the people who were nominated were people who have been nominated before. We can look at the sequel status over the years, so it looks pretty similar to what the last couple years have looked like. 2018 through 2020, we have 50% or more being sequels, indirect or direct. And then 2021, 2022, 2023, exactly 5. And this year we had 4. We can talk about how these books relate to me. I just finished Sorceress yesterday, but that one doesn't count. 5 of these books I read. 2 of them I basically only read for the awards, but 3 of them I read of my own volition. 2 of the books were from series in which I have read a book from, and there were 5 authors on here that I have read a book from before, but I had not read that one. Honestly, most of them I did not have a positive opinion of. We could also see low and high fantasy, so 7 of the books I would safely say are high fantasy, 12 of them would be low. There weren't a lot of high fantasy first books in series this year. Just really wasn't happening in terms of what was really in the popular eye. In terms of what books are retellings, because as I mentioned, those are pretty popular, or like books influenced by mythology or folklore, we have 6 books that are advertised as being inspired by mythology or a retelling of something. I think that's all I have about those. Yay, this clip was 30 minutes long, bro. Absolutely not. I am like 75 pages into, I keep wanting to call it the Selkie Wife, but it is A Sweet Sting of Salt. I'm liking it so far. Our main character is Jean. She lives in, I believe, Nova Scotia in the early 1800s, and she is a midwife. She is kind of an outsider in her community, and she's really lonely because her best friend Jo went off and married a man and moved somewhere else, and she's really feeling lonely without her. On a very stormy night, a woman is outside of her door screaming in pain, and it turns out that her neighbor's new wife, who she had barely ever seen, is pregnant and is having the baby. And she, in the midst of the storm, delivers the baby, and this woman doesn't really speak English, and she keeps talking about wanting to go to the water, and she's worried about her, so she decides to help her more than usual. This is a sapphic reimagining of the Selkie Wife, which is a Gaelic tale. The woman who is going to be the Selkie, this pregnant woman, she's actually speaking Gaelic. She like can't understand English and everything. It's reminding me so far, like in setting and a little bit of atmosphere, and of course that this is a sapphic story, it's kind of reminding me of A Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Could there be a more complimentary comparison that I could give it? I'm not very far into it, but I'm definitely getting a good atmosphere off of this, and I'm definitely feeling for Jean, as she is very clearly a lesbian, and people aren't going to be accepting of that. And I'm really curious to see how this is going to integrate the Selkie Wife, because I'm under the impression that this is more direct retelling than like A Sorceress Comes to Call was of the Goose Girl. I don't know how much more of A Sweet Sting of Salt I'm going to be able to read today, but I'm definitely going to be able to read more of A Song to Drown Rivers because I will be in the car. I have made more progress in both of my books. I have not made as much progress into Sweet Sting of Salt as I would like, but I've made more progress in A Song to Drown Rivers than I expected. Let me do Sweet Sting of Salt. So this is actually an aardvark copy. I wanted to show off this because this Under the Dust Jacket is really interesting. This isn't like the papery stuff on a normal coating. It's almost got like a waxy kind of outer coating. It's kind of like a textbook where it could be like waterproof. Like if I put a water on this, it wouldn't be damaged like a normal book would be, which I like. However, I feel like captures like finger grease. I am 225 pages into 325, I think. I am very, very much enjoying this. I really like our main character. She's just put in such a difficult situation. If you're unfamiliar with the story of the Selkie Wife, a man kidnaps a Selkie to be his wife, and the only way that she can get back is if she can find her skin, but he's taken it from her. And in this, Guy got this wife who can't speak English, she speaks Gaelic, and he's kind of trapping her, keeping her away. And Jean, she has feelings for Murin, but like she's like, put aside my feelings for her. She has been kidnapped. She is being held against her will. And you have to think of like at this time, like a woman being held against her will by her husband, like isn't a thing a lot of society would care about. And Jean is trying her hardest to try to get her out of the situation. I really like the atmosphere and the tone and the setting. I have figured out where the skin is, by the way. I just want to say that. Really enjoying this, and I would like to stay up tonight reading this as much as I can. But A Song to Drown Rivers, I have an hour and a half left of a 10.5-hour audiobook. The couple of scenes that I mentioned before of like resemblances to Daughter of the Moon Goddess have not had any more. Our main character is now the concubine of the king, and the king is this young, handsome man, but he is totally brutal, thinks violence is the answer. I'm so glad the direction that this book is sticking to, because I have read so many fantasy books that start off with like a similar premise to this book, and then every single one of them goes in the same direction, and this is going in a different one. I'm not gonna get more specific than that because I think that's spoilers, but it's just refreshing. I think our main character is interesting to follow because at the beginning, in the first act, when we meet her, she is an extremely expressive person. She can't stop herself from saying what she means and what she's thinking, and she is trained to be a spy and keep everything behind a mask. And I feel like you can really tell the difference. I have liked the writing of it so far. I will say the romantic relationship is a little bit telling instead of showing. I'm gonna try to talk about this comment with the least amount of spoilers possible. Physical violence, like with swords and stuff, has been on display, no problem in this book. But when we're talking about like concubines and stuff, there is absolutely an omission of talking about the violence that would be done to those women. Like, these women are literally there for the king to have sex with them, and it is never once mentioned that he is. We're talking about one type of violence, and we're not talking about another type of violence, which would make this a more safe book for different types of people to read who have like trigger warnings or whatever. It's just like, it kind of stretches my credulity a little bit, because what else are the concubines there for? Genuine question. The tone of this book definitely does not lend itself to having those darker discussions. I think that this book is doing a good job with having our main character see people for the bad people that they are, and still she is aware that like, oh, the things that I'm doing are also perpetrating violence. Like, not saying that we need to be talking about assault in this book, but it definitely feels a little bit PG-ified. I will definitely have finished at least one book the next time I talk to you. Thought I'd give you a slightly different location while the sun's still out. I have finished A Song to Drown Rivers. I am very close, like 20 pages away from finishing A Sweet Sting of Salt, and I just picked up another book. I think I'm going to try a chapter tag of the two I have access to for the awards. So The Night Ends with Fire and Voyage of the Damned in this beautiful green copy. Nobody told me my library has an Illumicrate subscription. It is currently Monday. Next Tuesday is the last day to vote in the first round of the awards. So I am going to be finishing up this video before the first round is done. I'm sure that some of the books that I read in here won't make it, but I decided that I am going to read one more book just because I have access to them. I'll do a try chapter tag later. I'm going to talk about A Song to Drown Rivers. I was like, oh, this is a strong 4-star. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, is it? I completely forgot for a good portion of this that this is inspired by a story. I just read the story and hold up. Sisha was a real person. The legend is likely exaggerated. This book arguably has zero magic and takes place in the real world. If I had a nickel
for every time in 2024 that I read a book that marketed itself as a fantasy book, but then was set on Earth and had no magic, I'd have at least 2 nickels. Yeah, like, is this not just historical fiction? The 2 kingdoms that are fighting were real kingdoms. The people that they're talking about are real people. So I understand, like, marketing this for the fantasy crowd because it's like court politic-y, but like, this isn't a fantasy book. Regardless, I think this book does a lot of telling and not showing, particularly when it comes to the relationships, the romance that we're supposed to root for, and also when it comes to like our main character being a spy. I feel like this made the ending of the story a little bit more gray, as our main character is kind of dealing with the consequences of her own actions. So I like that conversation at the end. I think the prose might be a little bit too purple for some people. I liked it for the most part. I think our narrator was good as well in the audiobook. I wanted more to happen. And also, I just wish that this had expanded on the original story at all. Like, the book does not stray from the Wikipedia article basically at all. I think that this book could have done more to talk about what must have been the realistic details of this situation. This has a fairly light tone. It's not grim, dark at all. And I think that this could have really dove into more what our main character had to go through, specifically because she's literally a concubine and they do not discuss the reality of what a concubine is. They pretend that the emperor does not participate in sex. I had a good reading experience. There were parts of it that I did like I got through this really easily. I was engaged the whole time, but I think there's a piece missing here. I mean, the other 2 books that I'm reading in this video are taking the myth and doing something with them. And I don't know that this book did something with it, if that makes sense. I don't know how long I'm going to be thinking about this book after it's done. Let me posit this. Is this a YA book that has been pushed to the adult audience? I would say the violence in here is, the same as a lot like YA fantasy that I've read. Like, this book is no worse than The Hunger Games, which is YA, and this actively goes against discussing adult topics such as concubines. I don't know. Look, I think this was good. I think it really could have been great if it had done more to build on the original story. I'm not an expert on the story at all. Obviously, this is not my culture either. I don't know. Maybe I'll talk more later. Maybe I'll change my mind. I want to drive home and then finish A Sweet Sting of Salt. Also, I noticed that every single book that I read in this video so far starts with A and then a word that's an S. It must have been confusing for everybody. Oopsies. Okay, I'm gonna go home.
I did it. I finished A Sweet Sting of Salt, and I really enjoyed this one. There was so much to like. There was so much. I loved this coastal town in the olden times, and it's freezing out, and the elements are an active issue. I really enjoyed how this integrated the story of the Selkie wife, because it does the tale between the Selkie wife and her husband, but it adds the element of our main character in a way that I think brought something new to the story. I really liked Jean as our main character. I liked the things that she has to question. We as the reader know much more than she does, because she obviously doesn't believe in Selkies. That element of dramatic irony was good. I liked the relationship between the 2 of them. I just thought everything was built up really well. I think this paid the right amount of attention to everything that it did. I did like the ending. I think that was the right choice. I'm not going to say in what direction it goes, but I think that was the right decision for this book, given the tone of the rest of it. And I liked how the big villain of this book is the man who kidnapped this woman. How the story, from his perspective, is a romance and she's just misbehaving. And we are seeing as he is actually a very possessive and controlling man. She can't just be taken away. She doesn't have that autonomy. And I'll definitely be recommending it. I'm so glad it got the nomination, despite such low readership, because I do think that this totally deserves the nomination. Let me get those try chapters in. I hate making menial decisions. There's nothing I hate more than making a decision where the options don't matter and I have read about the same amount of Voyage of the Damned and The Night Ends with Fire. 2 chapters of one of the other. No strong feelings either way. Night Ends with Fire is a Mulan retelling. It is set in a world that is inspired by China. In the first chapter, we see that her father is not ailing like in the original tale, but that he's like an angry and spiteful man, and that he's gambling and has taken all their money away, and he just doesn't want to go to war. In the second chapter, she is set to meet the matchmaker to try to get her married so they can have a dowry. Voyage of the Damned, we are in a high fantasy world. There's 12 different districts all named after different animals. There's like one person in leadership in each of the different counties. They have a blessing, and once the person has a child, the child gets old enough, it will pass on to the next person and they will no longer have the blessing. But our main character is the son of one of these blessed people, and the dad's power has never passed on to him or any of the illegitimate children. And now he's going to be stuck on a boat with all of the other actually blessed people while he's lying about that he's blessed. And there's going to be a murder mystery. Plot-wise, I'm more interested in that one. However, the narration style is not entirely jiving with me right now. It's definitely like trying to be funny. Also, it's a lot of telling about the world building instead of showing. I'll make up my mind. I am just over the halfway mark of Voyage of the Damned. I'm having fun with this. I think it took me a little bit of time to get used to the humor of this book. Our main character is very irreverent. This is from the UK, so I'm assuming the author is too. Sometimes reading British humor doesn't always work for me. I watch a lot of British stuff, but sometimes it doesn't always translate on the page for me. I think it just took a little bit of an adjustment period to get to what this tone is and what it's trying to do. Let me give another synopsis if I didn't do a good enough one. We have this world, there are 12 different provinces, but there's actually one outside of this that they have just like barred from their society. Each of these different provinces is represented by a specific animal, and there's a ruling family. They have blessings that they pass down onto their children, which is a magical power which can manifest in different ways, and it's a secret what all of these powers are, even to the other people in charge. Our main character is supposed to be blessed, but he didn't get the blessing. The 12th person in their generation has manifested their blessing, so they are going on this pilgrimage, do a religious ceremony essentially, and become more united, and they're on this boat. And on the very first night, the heir of the Dragon Province, which is the head province, is killed. Which is a shame because she actually seemed really cool. The way I was picturing her, I'm like, oh my god, love. People start dying. People are trying to figure out who did this. So when this says it's comparing it to Agatha Christie, it definitely has an "and then there were none" vibe of people are being picked off in this isolated situation. And we have done a good amount of like talking to each of the characters, trying to figure out what they know. So it is an apt descriptor. It's not like the tone. This is a more comedic fantasy, even when it is discussing more serious things, such as this like exiled province that everyone is extremely discriminatory towards. This is definitely an adult book. The language alone is very much an adult book, but there's some elements that feel like a 2010s YA dystopian novel, like the fact that all these provinces have different animals and they all have very distinct traits, and all of the places have different distinct geographic features, and all of the different provinces, all of the people have different hair colors, which on one hand I think it's fun fantasy thing because okay, why not? Why don't they all have different hair colors? But on the other hand, I'm like, that is so Tumblr. I'm having fun with this. It's not a new favorite. I definitely think one of the problems with this is that it's very info dumpy. It does not give the reader information in a very natural way. It's almost direct to reader. And there's just a couple other things here and there that make me be like, oh yeah, this is definitely a debut. I also had picked out a huge plot hole. I was like, how is it possible that this could possibly happen with the magic? And then it turns out that our main character was actually operating under a false impression about how the magic worked. And I was like, okay, good. That's great. See you in a bit. Hello. It is the next day. I'm not sure you can hear it in my voice, but I am a little bit sick. I did finish my pages last night. I haven't started mine for today. We're over 100 pages out from the end. The longer I've gone in this book, the more fun I have been having. I do quite like our main character. I think he's an interesting person to follow, with a lot of the humor that he's using to deflect a lot of stuff. There was like a reveal of someone's power that was kind of obvious to me, and also I think there's been a bit of insta love. As much as I do like those two characters together, the first time that the main character even considers that they could have a crush on this person, the first thought is, I'm in love with them. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna do my reading, and I think I'm gonna have more time to read today than the last several days, so I'm hoping to finish this just in case I do get worse tomorrow and just finish out the vlog. Really hope that we get a lot of good murder mystery antics from here. How many vlogs have I ended in this exact same spot? Because I finish all my reading at night, and this is the best lit spot at night. But I have finished Voyage of the Damned. I'm definitely giving this a 4. The magical element of this is not too deep. Everybody got a magical power. You gotta find out what the magical power is. Our main character is fun, but also as the book goes further, we get a little bit more depth to him in a more serious tone than I would have expected. Honestly, there were a couple of things that were like darker than I expected. You know, sometimes murder mysteries are a little bit sanitized. I had predictions for 2 bad guys, and I was correct on one of them. So I'm pretty proud that I got the one, because I thought, like, behavior-wise, I was like, This is the 3rd sci-fi fantasy murder mystery that I have read this year. The other ones were The Tainted Cup and The Last Murder at the End of the World. Both of those 2 books, I thought that they had really interesting fantasy things that the author pushed to the back burner for a murder mystery that I didn't think was well developed, or like I just didn't care about nearly as much as the other stuff. Versus this one, I cared about the mystery, and I had theories about the mystery, and things felt within my grasp. And even though we are trying to figure out what everybody's magical powers are, and that logic kind of messes with the typical mystery formula, I did think that things were set up well enough in advance that you could get close, if not completely there. I think there's some good messaging about not othering people and classism and stuff like that, which is great. And this book is also has a lot of representation by characters, asexual, non-binary, fat rep, and disabled rep as well. So I know it took me a minute to get into this, but by the end of it, I was very invested, and I had no problem sitting down and finishing it. So that means I need to pick what books I'm going to be voting for. So I think I have 3 full days of the first round of voting left, and then the second round of voting is going to start. Now I have read 9 of the Goodreads Choice Awards for fantasy. We'll start with my bottom tier and work our way up to the top. Bottom tier, my 3 stars, books that I thought had something pretty big missing. The Familiar, Tainted Cup, and The Book of Doors. All of these I was left wanting quite a bit. Then above my 3 stars are going to be my 3.5 stars. The first is The Dead Cattail Assassins. I didn't really talk about what this is about, but this is a fantasy novella in which these gods very much affect daily life. And one of these goddesses, you can pledge yourself to her in life, and after you die, she resurrects you, wipes your memory, and you are an assassin for her. Our main character, she ends up having a target. This person appears to have some sort of connection to our main character's past that she can't even remember. This was 200 pages and needed to be like 400, 500. It felt like so much was cut out that like details of scenes felt like they were just being chopped out, and I just wanted so much more. I just wish P. Jelly Clark would write longer books because I love every single one of his ideas. And then the other is going to be A Song to Drown Rivers. I enjoyed my experience, but then I tried to describe what I liked about the book, and I couldn't say like as many things as I would think. I liked learning this story, like this legend that I personally was not familiar with. But then like I do research on the story, and like the author didn't really do anything with the story, and I felt like there was more to be done here? There's not that much plot that's going on here. And also, is it a fantasy book? Definitionally. To me, that's a historical fiction with a little bit of a speculative twist at the end. That is actually the third book that I've read this year that markets itself as a fantasy book, but is actually set on Earth and has no magic in it. On to my 4-star. My 4-star is going to be Voyage of the Damned. I thought that this was fun. You just heard all my thoughts on it. I thought it was a good time. I would look forward to this author's work in the future. 4.25 to 4.5 territory. We have 2 books. This one I remember quite enjoying. I really liked the atmosphere of this one. I liked being in the World War I era. The magical part of this is the bad guy. I think it's a really poignant way to describe what a lot of these people were going through. I love this metaphor that is being used. I remember there being a couple things that were my favorite. The thing that comes to mind is I wasn't in love with the romance. This is a book that I would widely recommend to different people. Sorceress Comes to Call. This did a really good job being like an interpolation of the myth, on top of being an interesting story of trying to get a girl out of an abusive situation. There's a little bit of magic here, there's a little bit of horror here. T. Kingfisher's flavor is really interesting, and I'm glad that I had another win from her. And then my 4.5, 4.75, maybe up to a 5, is going to be A Sweet Sting of Salt. I was remarkably invested in this book. I really love the writing style. I thought the atmosphere was really strong, and I really like the type of danger that our characters are in felt very palpable. I really rooted for our main character. I loved the themes of this. A Song to Drown Rivers is a straight telling of the myth, just the myth in novel form. This is a reimagining. There's different inserts of the myth, versus this is what I would consider to be a retelling, where it is taking the story of the myth and we're changing it to have noticeable differences to commentate on the original story. And I thought this did a great job with it. This is going to end up being my vote. However, we know mathematically this book is not going to make it to the second round. It did not have 4,000 reviews on the day of the awards, so it physically just doesn't have enough readership behind it for it to make it to round 2. So that means I have to pick between these 2 to be my vote. LOL. I really thought. No, the final round has come out, and it turns out that those 2 books, neither of them made it to the final round. They were the only 2 books in the top 10 most read books of the year that did not make it. And they were replaced by Empire of the Damned, which was the highest rated books of the year, so that makes sense. So that if people read multiple books, they would pick it over something else. And The Fox Wife, which makes sense because the target demographic was not the traditional fantasy audience. So now, the only books that I have read from this list are books that I have rated 3 stars. The Tainted Cup, The Book of Doors, and The Familiar. And yeah, I am going to be voting for The Tainted Cup. I easily think of the 3 books that I read on here, the best in the fantasy department specifically. It just had more going for it. Especially the front half of this book, I thought it had more going for it, and it was more execution toward the end I wasn't a fan of. I think The Familiar has nothing outstanding to offer. I think The Book of Doors is incredibly derivative and also has some off-color jokes or something like that. Just didn't give me the best vibes. So The Tainted Cup having some of the most original fantasy elements that I've read in the last couple years, having all of these different biographs and everything that people put all over their body to enhance themselves, to have, it's almost on a sci-fi level, but it does feel fantastical. So despite me only giving the book a 3-star because I wasn't as much of a fan of the mystery plot and I wasn't very connected to the characters, The Tainted Cup is going to be my vote for the final round. This video was way too long, but you've heard me talk about all of these Goodreads Choice Awards picks for so long. There's so much raw footage, I don't even know what to do with it. But I would love to know what you're going to be voting for. And as far as who is going to win the awards, I will be shocked if it is not The Familiar, but c'est la vie. If you made it this far, thank you. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. But I had so much fun having so much work going into the awards and seeing it pay off with actually predicting correctly and getting to read some books that I was interested in and I probably wouldn't have read immediately. So Thank you for being here. But if you would like to find me anywhere, you can hit that link in the description. And if you'd like to see more videos from me, you can go and hit that subscribe button. My end of year, beginning of the year video schedule is packed with stuff. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.